Vader knew he'd get his ass handed to him. That's the obvious answer, and it's correct. Send Vader after a 900-year-old Jedi Grandmaster who'd already fought Palpatine to a standstill? Vader comes back in pieces. Or doesn't come back at all. But here's what nobody talks about. Palpatine may have known exactly where Yoda was the entire time, and he chose to leave him there. Not because hunting him was too risky, not because Dagobah was too remote, because watching the greatest Jedi Master in galactic history rot in a swamp, surrounded by dark side energy, living every single day with the knowledge that everything he built had been destroyed, that was the victory. Death would have been mercy. Palpatine didn't deal in mercy. Let me show you what I mean. In 19 BBY, Anakin Skywalker burned on Mustafar. Obi-Wan left him limbless, scorched across most of his body, his respiratory system destroyed by volcanic gas. When Palpatine arrived to collect what remained of his new apprentice, the damage was catastrophic. Third-degree burns everywhere, multiple severed limbs, lungs that couldn't function without mechanical assistance. Now here's the thing. Imperial medical technology in Canon, specifically documented in the Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith comic series beginning in 2017, was capable of sophisticated reconstruction, prosthetics that felt natural, respiratory systems that allowed normal breathing. Palpatine had access to the most advanced medical facilities in the galaxy. He chose the opposite. The cybernetic limbs and life support suit that kept Vader alive also kept him in constant physical pain. Every breath a struggle, every movement a reminder of what he'd lost. The prison of metal wasn't a limitation of technology, it was a design choice. A deliberate architectural decision to ensure his apprentice never experienced a single moment of physical comfort for the rest of his existence. In Legends material, specifically the novel Dark Lord, The Rise of Darth Vader by James Luceno, published in 2005, the psychological torture went even further. Palpatine fed Vader false hope about Padme's survival in the weeks following his reconstruction. He let grief fester into desperate optimism, then revealed the truth at a moment calculated to maximize anguish. This wasn't incidental, it was engineered. But Vader's transformation was only the beginning of the pattern. The novel Lords of the Sith by Paul S. Kemp, published in 2015, reveals something crucial about how Palpatine operated as a master. Set approximately 5 years after the Empire's formation, the book follows Palpatine and Vader as they become stranded on Ryloth during a Free Ryloth movement ambush. What should have been a crisis became something else entirely, a test. Palpatine deliberately placed himself and Vader in danger, not because he couldn't escape, but because he wanted to observe his apprentice under pressure. He wanted to see if Vader would break, if he'd succumb to doubt, if he'd reveal weakness that needed to be addressed. Throughout the Ryloth crisis, Palpatine watches Vader struggle against insurgents, predators, and his own limitations. He offers no assistance unless absolutely necessary. He pushes Vader to the edge of his capabilities, then pushes further. The entire scenario reads less like a military emergency and more like a controlled experiment in psychological endurance. And here's the key insight from that novel. Palpatine doesn't want strong apprentices. He wants broken ones. Powerful, yes. Capable, certainly. But fundamentally damaged in ways that ensure they remain dependent, controllable, and eternally suffering. A healthy, confident Vader would be dangerous. A Vader perpetually reminded of his failures, his losses, his imprisonment in a metal shell. That Vader serves the dark side perfectly. Suffering isn't a byproduct of Palpatine's rule, it's the product. And Vader wasn't the first to learn this. 1 year before the Empire's formation, in 20 BBY during the Clone Wars Season 5 finale, The Lawless, Darth Maul resurfaced. He'd survived being cut in half on Naboo, rebuilt himself through sheer hatred, and carved out a criminal empire on Mandalore. Palpatine could have ordered his execution through intermediaries. A quick death, problem solved. Instead, he traveled to Mandalore personally. He engaged Maul and his brother Savage Opress in direct combat, killed Savage in front of Maul, made him watch his brother die, made him feel that loss rip through their force bond, then overpowered his former apprentice and declared, "I'm not going to kill you. I have other uses for you." Maul was taken into custody and tortured, not for information, not for strategic advantage, because Palpatine wanted him to suffer. The Darth Maul, Son of Dathomir comic series, published in 2014, depicts what happened next. Maul escaped custody, eventually, but his mind never escaped what Palpatine did to him. The torture sessions broke something fundamental in his psyche. He'd been Palpatine's apprentice once, trained from childhood to believe he was the chosen weapon of the Sith, then discarded the moment he failed. Replaced by Dooku, replaced again by Vader. Every replacement a reminder that Maul had never been special, had never been the endgame, had only ever been a tool to be used and thrown away. Years later, in Star Wars Rebels Season 3 episode Twin Suns, aired in 2017, we see where that torture led. Maul had spent years hunting Obi-Wan Kenobi across the galaxy. Obsessed. Broken. When he finally found Obi-Wan on Tatooine, he was a raving wreck, screaming into the desert darkness, demanding the confrontation that would give his suffering meaning. Obi-Wan killed him in 3 strikes, maybe 4. The duel lasted seconds, and in those final moments, Maul asked about Luke, about the boy Obi-Wan was protecting. "He will avenge us," Maul whispered, dying in his enemy's arms. Us. Not me. Us. Meaning Maul still saw himself as connected to the Jedi he'd spent his life hunting, because Palpatine's torture had stripped away everything else. Every identity, every purpose, every relationship except the bond between victims. That's what Palpatine's cruelty produces. Not just pain, erasure. Maul spent his final years wandering the galaxy as a howling ghost, unable to move past the trauma of his abandonment. His suffering was loud, public. He screamed it at anyone who would listen. Compare that to Yoda. Yoda's suffering was silent. No one to scream at, no enemy to hunt. Just a swamp and a cave and 20 years of quiet disintegration. Maul's torture drove him mad in ways everyone could see. Yoda's torture was invisible, which made it worse. A madman can be pitied. A hermit just disappears. This is the pattern. This is who Yoda was fleeing. So when we ask why the Empire never hunted Yoda, we're asking the wrong question. The real question is, why would Palpatine want Yoda dead when he could watch him live and suffer instead? To understand the answer, we need to talk about the Dark Side Cave. Dagobah sits in the Slough sector of the Outer Rim territories, coordinates M19 on standard galactic charts. Swamps, bogs, dense vegetation crawling with predators ranging from microscopic parasites to creatures large enough to swallow a starfighter. No indigenous sentient species, no settlements, no research stations, no strategic value whatsoever. The planet doesn't appear on any Imperial priority list for any purpose. It generates no resources worth extracting. It supports no population requiring governance. It guards no hyperlane requiring patrol. By every conventional measure, Dagobah is worthless. But what made Dagobah significant to Yoda wasn't its worthlessness. In both canon and legends, Dagobah is classified as a vergence in the Force, a location where the boundaries between the physical world and the underlying energy field grow thin. The planet teems with life in staggering abundance, generating a constant hum of living Force energy that permeates everything. And concentrated within this matrix of thriving, pulsing life exists something else entirely: the Cave of Evil. Sometimes called the Dark Side Vergence, or simply the Dark Cave in various sources, this subterranean formation on Dagobah has pooled dark side energy for unknown millennia. In Legends material, particularly the Essential Guide to the Force, published in 2007, the cave's origin traces to a powerful dark side user who died there in ancient times. Their corrupted essence saturated the location permanently, bleeding malevolence into the stone and soil and air itself. In canon, the exact genesis remains mysterious, but the effects are consistent across both continuities. Here's what matters. The cave's critical property was force magnetic. The intense concentration of dark side energy created an interference pattern that obscured force signatures in its vicinity. Think of it like trying to spot a candle flame inside a bonfire. The candle exists, it's burning, but the surrounding conflagration makes it impossible to detect. A powerful light side presence like Yoda's would normally shine like a beacon through the Force, detectable by any sufficiently powerful dark side practitioner across vast distances. Palpatine had felt disturbances in the Force from across the galaxy throughout his rise to power. He maintained awareness of his enemy's movements with terrifying precision. But positioned near the dark side cave, that same presence became masked. Light swallowed by surrounding darkness, signal lost in noise. Yoda knew exactly what he was choosing. This wasn't a desperate gamble by a fleeing refugee. This was a calculated decision by a being with 9 centuries of Force knowledge. In the Clone Wars animated series, specifically the Season 6 episodes Voices, Destiny, and Sacrifice, originally aired in 2014 as part of the Lost Missions, Yoda undertakes a Force journey during the final months of the Clone Wars. The spirit of Qui-Gon Jinn directs him to Dagobah specifically, tells him the planet holds answers he needs. Yoda enters the dark side cave. He confronts a manifestation of his own suppressed darkness, a phantom version of himself consumed by rage, fear, and aggression. Red eyes, twisted features. Everything the serene Grandmaster had spent centuries denying existed within him, given form and voice. The vision attacks him, taunts him, tries to break his composure. The sequence establishes something crucial. Yoda was aware of Dagobah's properties before Order 66. He knew what the cave was. He knew what it did. He knew the psychological toll it exacted from Force users who entered its sphere of influence. His choice of exile location wasn't random. It was informed, strategic, and it came with a cost he understood completely. Because here's what the cave actually does to Force-sensitive beings who approach it. The cave functions as a dark side nexus, a point where dark side energy concentrates so intensely that it actively manifests psychological phenomena. Any Force user approaching experiences visions, not pleasant ones, confrontations with deepest fears, suppressed darkness dragged to the surface, potential futures along the path of corruption, failures relived, losses reopened. When Luke Skywalker entered the cave in 3 ABY, he faced a vision of Darth Vader and struck it down, only to see his own face beneath the mask. The cave didn't show him random horror. It showed him the specific horror most relevant to his psyche, the possibility that he might become what he hated. The dark side feeds on fear, anger, hatred, and suffering. A location saturated with dark side energy actively seeks these emotions in those who approach, draws them out, amplifies them, manifests them as visions that test and potentially corrupt the visitor. The dark side doesn't wait passively. It reaches out, whispers, offers power in exchange for surrender, exploits every doubt and fear. For a Jedi Master already carrying profound guilt over catastrophic failure, already grappling with the destruction of everything he'd built over 9 centuries, the cave's proximity would represent constant psychological pressure. Every day, every night. An unending siege against his mental defenses. Yoda established his dwelling, a small mud shelter constructed from local materials, within proximity of the cave. His Force presence remained obscured by ambient dark side energy. Perfect concealment. He had found the perfect hiding place. He had also chosen to live under perpetual assault. Now, someone's going to ask about the Inquisitors. Fair question. Let me address it directly so nobody thinks I'm dodging. The Inquisitorius was established in 19 BBY, immediately following the Empire's formation. In Canon, depicted across Star Wars Rebels from 2014 to 2018, the Darth Vader Dark Lord of the Sith comics, and the video game Jedi Fallen Order, released in 2019. This organization operated under Vader's direct command with one purpose: hunting surviving Jedi. The composition tells you everything about Palpatine's approach to defeated enemies. Rather than simply executing captured Jedi, the Empire's torture and interrogation programs broke them, psychologically and spiritually, turned them to the dark side, then inducted them into the organization dedicated to hunting their former brothers and sisters. The Grand Inquisitor himself was formerly a Jedi Temple guard, one of the anonymous sentinels who protected the Order's most sacred spaces. His corruption transformed a symbol of Jedi protection into an instrument of Jedi destruction. Every time he killed a Jedi, he was killing what he used to be. That's not efficiency, that's poetry. Palpatine's kind of poetry. Between 19 BBY and 14 BBY, the Inquisitors achieved significant success. Dozens of confirmed Jedi eliminations documented in Canon. They were effective hunters, relentless, well-resourced with purge trooper support, specialized stormtrooper units trained specifically for anti-Jedi operations. But here's where the Yoda question gets interesting. The Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith comics, specifically issues 7 through 10 published in 2017, include an arc involving Jocasta Nu, the Jedi Temple's chief librarian, an elderly woman, not a warrior, not a council member, just a keeper of records who survived Order 66 and returned to the temple to retrieve something critical, a holocron containing the names and locations of every Force-sensitive child in the galaxy. When the Grand Inquisitor tracked her down, what should have been a simple elimination became something else entirely. Jocasta had built herself a weapon, a lightsaber rifle, her own design, combining a lightsaber blade with a long-range focusing mechanism that turned the weapon into something no Jedi had ever wielded before. She wasn't just a librarian defending herself. She was a librarian who'd spent months preparing for exactly this confrontation. The Grand Inquisitor, this supposedly fearsome Jedi hunter who'd been racking up confirmed kills across the galaxy, took cover. Took actual cover from a librarian. Because her lightsaber rifle was punching through walls and nearly taking his head off with every shot. He couldn't close the distance, couldn't use his superior combat training, had to call for reinforcements. And here's the thing that really matters. Even with reinforcements, even with purge troopers backing him up, the Grand Inquisitor couldn't secure the capture alone. Vader had to intervene personally. Darth Vader, the enforcer of the entire Empire, had to show up to deal with an old woman whose primary skill was cataloging holocrons. When Vader finally cornered Jocasta, she didn't beg, didn't run. She grabbed the Grand Inquisitor's lightsaber and tried to kill Vader with it, knowing she'd die in the attempt, knowing it wouldn't work, but refusing to give Palpatine the satisfaction of a cowering prisoner. Vader killed her. Obviously. But the fight took resources, time, and personal attention from the second most powerful being in the Empire. For a librarian. Now scale that up. Yoda wasn't a librarian. Yoda was the being who had trained Jedi for 800 years. The Grandmaster who sat atop an order of 10,000 Force users. The warrior who fought Count Dooku to standstills, who dueled Palpatine himself in the Senate chamber and walked away. The most powerful Jedi in galactic history by virtually any measure. If the Inquisitors struggled against Jocasta Nu, sending them after Yoda wouldn't be a hunt. It would be a mass execution of Inquisitors. Every single one of them would die, painfully, quickly, and Palpatine would have lost the entire apparatus he'd built for hunting lesser Jedi, all for a target who would simply relocate afterward anyway. The Inquisitorius possessed critical limitations baked into their design. Their methodology was reactive, not proactive. They maintained informant networks across Imperial space, responded to reports of Force-sensitive activity, Jedi sightings, unusual phenomena that suggested surviving Force users. When targets were identified, they deployed. But a Jedi who maintained complete isolation, used no Force abilities that might be detected, interacted with no civilization that might report unusual activity, lived on a planet with no Imperial presence, no settlements, no communications infrastructure, that Jedi never appeared on their targeting systems. Ever. So the Inquisitors explain why Yoda could hide successfully. They don't explain why no one with actual power, Vader, Palpatine himself, ever came looking. And here's something that makes Yoda's situation even more striking. He wasn't the only Jedi Master in exile. Obi-Wan Kenobi hid on Tatooine for 19 years. Same time frame, same galactic circumstances, same Empire hunting survivors. But Obi-Wan's exile was fundamentally different from Yoda's, and the contrast reveals just how cruel Yoda's fate really was. Obi-Wan had a mission: watch over Luke, protect the boy from a distance, ensure Anakin's son survived to adulthood. Every day Obi-Wan woke up in that desert hovel, he had purpose, a reason to keep going, someone who needed him, even if that someone didn't know he existed. When things got dangerous, when Inquisitors came too close, when criminals threatened Luke's family, when the Force demanded action, Obi-Wan could act. Carefully, strategically, but he could do something. The Kenobi series from 2022 shows him intervening directly to save a young Leia Organa. The various Canon novels depict him subtly influencing events around the Lars homestead. He was constrained, yes, but not powerless. Yoda had nothing. No mission. No charge to protect. No one who needed him. Just waiting. Waiting for a hope so distant it might never arrive. Waiting for the children of Anakin Skywalker to grow old enough to receive training. Children he'd never met, might never meet, who might die in Imperial crossfire before they ever learned what they were. Obi-Wan could look across the desert and see Luke playing outside the moisture farm. Could watch him grow. Could mark the years by the boy's increasing height and capability. Tangible evidence that his exile served a purpose. That someday, all this hiding might mean something. Yoda looked across a swamp and saw nothing but fog and predators and the dark presence of the cave pulsing against his consciousness. No student, no hope, no evidence that his survival mattered to anyone except himself. The difference is the difference between a prisoner with a release date and a prisoner serving life without parole. Obi-Wan could endure because endurance had an endpoint. Yoda endured because the alternative was giving Palpatine exactly what he wanted. And here's the cruel irony. Obi-Wan's exile was his own choice, made to protect someone he loved. Yoda's exile was forced on him by circumstance. Obi-Wan chose Tatooine because Luke was there. Yoda chose Dagobah because nowhere else would hide him. That's the difference between sacrifice and imprisonment. Obi-Wan sacrificed his freedom for Luke. Yoda was simply imprisoned. By failure. By guilt. By the dark side cave that kept him alive while slowly eating away at his spirit. Which brings us back to the real question. The one nobody asks because the obvious answer satisfies most people. What was Yoda's psychological state during those 20 years? What exactly was Palpatine's cruelty achieving? Yoda arrived on Dagobah in 19 BBY, carrying the weight of catastrophic failure. Not abstract failure, not institutional failure, specific, countable, named failure. He had served as Grandmaster of the Jedi Order during its destruction. He had sat on the council that failed to detect Palpatine's true nature, despite decades of direct interaction with him. Meetings, conversations, moments where the Sith Lord stood right there in their presence, and they sensed nothing. He had approved Anakin Skywalker's training, despite persistent concerns about the boy's attachments and emotional instability. Then watched that training produce the weapon that massacred Jedi younglings in the temple. 900 years of accumulated wisdom. The most experienced Jedi alive. The being other Jedi came to for guidance. And he hadn't prevented catastrophe. Hadn't even seen it coming. The Clone Wars episodes from 2014 depicting Yoda's Force journey establish he was already grappling with fundamental doubts about Jedi doctrine before the Order fell. The Force priestesses who guided his journey tested his ability to accept his own shadows rather than deny them. His confrontation with his dark manifestation in the Dagobah cave revealed suppressed aspects of his psyche, pride, fear, aggression, that existed beneath his serene exterior. Yoda passed those tests. But the experience demonstrated that even the Grand Master wasn't immune to the dark side's pull. Even he had darkness within him. Even he could fall. Now he lived beside that same cave, day after day, year after year. 22 years total, from 19 BBY until Luke's arrival in 3 ABY. In canon material, the novel From a Certain Point of View, The Empire Strikes Back, published in 2020, includes a short story depicting elements of Yoda's exile. Through the Force, Yoda maintained awareness of galactic events, sensing the growing darkness of the Empire, the distant presence of hope in the Skywalker twins. But this awareness was passive, observation without action, knowledge without power. He couldn't act. Action meant using the Force in ways that might be detected. Detection meant drawing attention. Attention meant death. Not just his death, but the death of hope itself. If Yoda died before training a new generation, the Jedi would truly be extinct. The Sith would rule forever. So he waited. And waiting, for someone like Yoda, was its own kind of torture. Every sunrise, if sunrise could exist in Dagobah's perpetual murk, its endless fog and swamp gas and canopy-choked gloom, brought fresh awareness that the dark side had won. Through the Force, he would have sensed the Empire's atrocities rippling across the galaxy. Worlds subjugated, populations enslaved, species exterminated, Alderaan destroyed in a single flash of technological horror. The Jedi reduced to hunted fugitives, picked off one by one, their numbers dwindling year after year, until Yoda might have been the last. Might have. He couldn't know for certain, couldn't reach out to check, couldn't do anything except sit in his mud hut and feel the darkness spreading. He could act against none of it. The cave that hid him also tormented him. Living within its sphere of influence meant living under constant dark side pressure. Whispers of failure that might have been real or might have been the cave's influence. After 20 years, how would he tell the difference? Visions of what might have been if he'd acted differently. The weight of every youngling slain in the Temple massacre. This is what Palpatine's cruelty achieved. Think about what Yoda represented to Palpatine. Not just an enemy, not just a threat neutralized. Yoda represented the entire Jedi Order's accumulated arrogance, their certainty that they understood the Force, that their visions revealed the future, that their wisdom surpassed all challengers. Palpatine had operated directly under their noses for decades, built his political power from senator to chancellor, manipulated their chosen one into becoming his weapon, orchestrated a galactic war using both sides as puppets, literally commanding the Separatists through Dooku while leading the Republic against them. And the Jedi, with all their vaunted insight, their meditation and communion with the Force, their prophecies and visions, never saw him. Never sensed the Sith Lord sitting across the table from them. Killing Yoda would have been simple satisfaction, a quick victory. One more Jedi eliminated, checkmark on a list, move on to the next problem. But leaving Yoda alive? Leaving him to marinate in failure? To wake every morning in a swamp on a worthless planet, knowing his 9 centuries of work had been destroyed in a single day? To feel, through the Force, every Jedi death, every Imperial atrocity, every triumph of the darkness he'd spent his entire existence fighting. That was something else entirely. That was art. In Legends, there's debate about whether Palpatine knew Yoda's specific location. In canon, it's left deliberately ambiguous. But consider, Palpatine was one of the most powerful Force users in galactic history. He'd sensed Anakin's potential from across the galaxy when the boy was still a slave on Tatooine. He'd manipulated events spanning decades through Force-guided foresight. And we're supposed to believe he couldn't sense the most powerful Jedi in existence? The dark side cave masked Yoda's presence. True. But masking isn't erasure. It's concealment. And concealment can be detected by its absence. A Force user as powerful as Palpatine, actively searching, might have noticed the suspicious void in the outer rim. The patch of darkness on Dagobah that seemed too convenient, too perfect for hiding. The Force signature that didn't read as Jedi here, but didn't read as nothing here either. Here's my read. You can disagree. Palpatine didn't need to find Yoda, because Yoda had already found exactly where Palpatine wanted him. A remote swamp. No followers, no students, no hope of rebuilding. Surrounded by dark side energy that pressed against his mind every single day, reminding him what had won. Sending anyone after Yoda risked disrupting the perfect punishment already in progress. Because that's what Dagobah was. Punishment. When Yoda confronted Palpatine in the Senate chamber in 19 BBY, the duel ended without decisive victory for either combatant. In Canon, Yoda fell from an elevated position after a Force lightning exchange created an explosion that sent both opponents flying. He landed far below. Physically capable of continuing the fight, but strategically aware the situation had become untenable. Clone troopers were converging. The Jedi Order was destroyed, regardless of whether he killed Palpatine in the next 5 minutes. In Legends, specifically the novelization of Revenge of the Sith by Matthew Stover published in 2005, Yoda's realization is described more explicitly. He understood the Jedi had already lost. Not just this battle, but the entire war they hadn't known they were fighting. The Sith had won decades ago, when they began their patient infiltration of the Republic's power structures. Fighting Palpatine to mutual destruction would accomplish nothing except ensuring no one remained to rebuild. Yoda fled through the Senate's maintenance systems with Bail Organa's assistance. Within hours, he was off Coruscant. Within days, he'd chosen his exile location, and Palpatine let him go. Not because he couldn't have pursued, not because the chase wasn't worth the resources, because the destination Yoda chose was better than any prison Palpatine could have designed. A Jedi Master hiding beside a dark side Vergence, feeling his order's legacy crumble through the Force, unable to act, unable to help, unable to do anything except wait and suffer and hope that somehow, someday, something might change. That was Palpatine's victory. Not killing Yoda, breaking him. For 22 years, the greatest Jedi Master in history lived as a hermit in a swamp, ate whatever he could forage from the muck, built a hut from mud and sticks, meditated beside a cave that whispered his failures back to him in the dark. When Luke Skywalker finally arrived in 3 ABY, he found a creature who seemed more mad than masterful, testing him with nonsense, pretending to be a simple swamp dweller, stealing his supplies, cackling at nothing. And when the pretense dropped, when Yoda revealed himself and Luke asked for training, reluctance, doubt, conviction that passing on his knowledge would only create another Vader, that training Anakin's son risked repeating the catastrophe that destroyed everything. Yoda didn't just survive on Dagobah, he endured. And there's a difference. Survival is biological, endurance is psychological. Yoda's body lived. His spirit spent 20 years under siege. This is the part no one talks about when they ask why the Empire never hunted Yoda. The hunting had already happened. The trap had already closed. The punishment was already being served. Palpatine didn't need to send Vader or the Inquisitors or a fleet or anyone else after Yoda. The Darkside Cave served as both hiding place and prison cell. Yoda's own guilt served as torturer. The Force itself, twisted by Sith victory, served as constant reminder of what had been lost. Death would have ended Yoda's suffering. And as we've seen with Vader, with Maul, with every enemy Palpatine chose to keep breathing, ending suffering was never the goal. The goal was prolonging it. So the next time someone asks why the Empire didn't hunt Yoda, remember the answer isn't just that Vader would have lost. That's the surface answer, the obvious one. The one that satisfies casual fans and lets them move on. The real answer is darker. Palpatine wanted the greatest Jedi Master in galactic history to live and suffer, to feel his failure, every day, for 20 years, to hide beside a cave that fed on his guilt and fear, to sense the Empire's atrocities through the Force and be powerless to stop any of them. The cave that saved Yoda's life was also his daily reminder that the dark side had won, and that, not a lightsaber duel, not a fleet deployment, not an Inquisitor squad, was Palpatine's true victory over the Jedi Order. He didn't need to destroy Yoda. He just needed to watch him break. Subscribe for more stories like this.